Hello, welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be going through my favourite film of each genre, so let's jump into it. So I'm going to be going through these alphabetical by the genre, so we'll start off with action and we'll end up with, I believe it's Western. And yeah, I was going to do an honourable mention for each one. I won't do an official one, but I might talk about two films in a particular genre. But yeah, let's just get cracking with it. So first off, we've got action. I'm going to start this list off with probably the most obvious answer or opinion, The Dark Knight. It's the action film I've watched the most amount of times. The actual action in it is brilliant as well. The car chases and the shootouts and that sort of hand-to-hand combat between Joker and Batman is really good. But it's more than just an action film, as we know. It's got layers to the storytelling. It's got themes and morals going on, good world building, and it's just, it's The Dark Knight, I did consider Mad Max Fury Road purely for that action element, because I think if we're talking about pure action, like stunts, choreography, just excitement, all that kind of stuff, like how visceral it is and the soundtrack, and if I was to watch a film purely for the action, I probably would go with Mad Max Fury Road. But I think all things considered, looking at it holistically, The Dark Knight's just got a bit more to it that makes me sort of want to go back and revisit it and spend time with those characters, and the storyline's more complex and more interesting to me, The Dark Knight. So yeah, favourite action film, The Dark Knight. Next up we've got adventure, and I had to bend a few rules with this one. So my favourite adventure film, I'm going for The Empire Strikes Back, and that is only because I could not fucking figure out if it's a fantasy film or a sci-fi film. So logically, I decided it was neither, so it's going in. I don't think there's loads to explain. I've got my my Empire Strikes Back canvas up there. It's a film it's so well crafted, and it's full of memorable moments throughout cinema. The Luke, I am your father. Oh, he doesn't even say that, does he? But no, I am your father. It's the first time we hear the Imperial March. It's the first time we meet Yoda. You've got all the stuff on Dagobah where Yoda's training Luke. I love that stuff. You see a bit more between Han and Leia. You see things sort of hot into it there. And it's just a great film. It's got the asteroid field sequence, which is a really good action sequence. It's got character moments. It's got great music, great cinematography, great editing. And again, it's just The Empire Strikes Back, isn't it? How can I not pick it? Next on the list, we've got animation, and I'm gonna go with Toy Story. This one took a little bit of deliberation. There are quite a few animated films that I really like, and 3 of my favourite animated films of all time are the first 3 Toy Story films. But the first Toy Story, it's probably not even the one I watched the most. I probably watched the second one more than the first one, and sometimes even the third one. But the first one kind of stands for animation as a genre. I think it was the first 3D computer animated film, and it kind of just represents the shift from 2D animation to 3D animation, and most of my favourite animated films are 3D animation. So Toy Story, you've got one of the most iconic duos ever in Woody and Buzz. You've got Randy Newman's score, which is just so... When I hear like You've Got a Friend in Me or something, it's just so nostalgic. That film came out a year before I was born, and then I remember seeing the second one and the third one and the fourth one at the cinemas, and I grew up just watching them so many times I could recite them word for word. I had like the PlayStation 1 game where you start off in the attic and you got to like shimmy down the drain pipe and collect coins and stuff. So yeah, Toy Story's just kind of always been ingrained in me. It's just one of those films that I watch it and I just feel like I'm 5 years old again. Because of A, nostalgia, but B, also because it's just actually a really good film that holds up well. I think even if I hadn't seen it as a kid and I watched it for the first time now, I think I'd still really enjoy it because it's got adult jokes, adult themes. It's, Buzz has a fucking existential crisis halfway through the film. You don't get that in like Minions movie, do you? So great film, Toy Story. The animation itself doesn't hold up that well now because it's 27 years old or something, but you can't hold that against it. It's a product of its time. And to be fair, I think they've remastered it on Disney Plus, and it doesn't look awful, but you can definitely tell if you watch Toy Story 3 or 4 how far the animation has come since then. But all things considered, Toy Story is my favourite animation film. Next up, we've got Biopic, which this is not a genre I tend to watch that much. There were a few sort of films in contention for this one, but I landed on The Wolf of Wall Street because it's just all-out entertainment. It's just 3 hours of chaos and humour and really good directing from Martin Scorsese. The camera work is just super energetic, it never stops. And then of course you've got one of the best performances, I would say, ever by Leonardo DiCaprio as Jordan Belfort. It's a really interesting story. I know some people think it glorifies like drugs or crime or whatever. I don't think it does. I won't deny that when you're watching it and you see him in a yacht or, surrounded by fine honeys or something, you are obviously like, yeah, that's pretty sick. But you know, by the end of the film, you know, he loses it all and he faces consequences for his actions and stuff. And I just think it's so much fun. I can't not, even if it was condoning that kind of behaviour. I mean, film's entertainment. It's a really entertaining film. It's got great performances from Jonah Hill and Leo DiCaprio, great directing, great storytelling, really good script from Terence Winter as well, a fascinating true story, and it's one of the best paced films I think I've ever seen. It's 3 hours long and it feels like it's 90 minutes. So yeah, Biopic, Wolf of Wall Street. Now we're on to comedy. Now my favourite comedy of all time, particularly if we're talking just pure laughs, like how often do I laugh at a film and how hard, it's gotta be Superbad. You know, I was born in the mid-90s and I grew up with shows like The In-Betweeners and Misfits with sort of really irreverent humour and really crude humour. And it was all about teenagers trying to get laid, basically. And Superbad is almost like the In-Betweeners film that should have been, I think. It's a laugh a minute, probably more than a laugh a minute, and an actual, not like a little chuckle, but like an actual laugh a minute. It's got some of the most iconic characters in comedy films. The two cops played by Seth Rogen and Bill Hader are brilliant. McLovin, of course, and then you've got a whole plethora of other people in it. Emma Stone's in there, Michael Cera, obviously, Jonah Hill. It's just a great film. It's more than a comedy though, that's the thing. It's a great comedy and it really is, in my opinion, the funniest film I think that exists. But it's also got a layer of heart, like in that last scene when Seth and Evan have to split up and go their separate ways, like one goes down the escalator and one goes up the escalator. It's just so symbolic of the fact that they're at this crossroads in their life and they're growing apart because they go to college and life's just not going to be the same and their friendship's not going to be the same, because that is unfortunately how life tends to go. Yeah, the soundtrack's also fucking sick. It's got Ace of Spades by Motorhead, it's got Panama by Van Halen, just a really good soundtrack, great cast, iconic characters, memorable lines, quotable dialogue, and above all, it's got heart. By the end of it, it's not even really about the humour, it's about the relationship between the two main guys, and it just hits on another level, which makes it so rewatchable for me anyway. After comedy, we've got crime, and I'm going to go for Pulp Fiction here. For me, crime is one of those genres that not many of my favourite films fall into the crime category, and if they do, it'll be something like Hot Fuzz or The Nice Guys, where it's really a comedy first and there's a crime element to it. But I thought, let's go with an actual crime film, where that's the sort of primary genre, and for me, it's Pulp Fiction. It's one of my favourite films of all time, probably one of your favourite films of all time. It's one of most people's favourite films of all time. I mean, there's been so much said about Pulp Fiction, it's almost like tiring to just tread that same path, but let's talk about it briefly. You know, I mentioned quotable lines in Superbad. I mean, Pulp Fiction is the script of all scripts for quotable lines. The way, I mean, it's easy now to watch it and you sort of forget, but I can remember the first time I watched Pulp Fiction, my dad showed me it when I was about 14 or 15, and I watched it and I knew it was great, but I didn't know what to make of it because I was trying to like piece together the timeline in my head. And they're going, okay, so they change into the sort of cartoon t-shirts then, which means that, so that happens before the diner scene, and then, but then if that happens, and you spend ages just trying to piece it all together, and that's like so much part of the fun. The performances are great, it's got some real black humour in it, the crime element's great, it's tense, it's dramatic, it's Pulp Fiction, you know, it's just cool, it's got iconic imagery in it, and like I say, just the most quotable dialogue you'll probably ever find in a script, and it kind of changed the movie landscape and it really put Quentin Tarantino on the map. If Reservoir Dogs didn't, then this really just catapulted him into the stratosphere. So Pulp Fiction, absolutely love it. That's my favourite crime film. Next up we've got documentary, which again, I don't tend to watch too many documentaries unless it's something I'm particularly interested about. One came out quite recently actually, 2021 I think it was, and it was called The Beatles Get Back, and it was all about how they made their final album, and you sort of saw the Beatles in their studio for, I think they got 3 weeks to come up with a new album, and they were just in there rehearsing all day, every day, coming up with, yeah, I mean, you literally get to see them creating classic songs out of thin air, which in itself is cool as hell, but then the fact that it's been recolorized by Peter Jackson and his team, it just looks, I mean, you know, it looks like it was filmed last week. It's just incredible. But if you see the side-by-sides of how it looked originally compared to how it looks after they've tampered with it, it's, you know, it's a world of difference. It really is. And it makes that connection stronger as well. Like, it's easy to watch. If you watch like old films in black and white, or even like footage of people in the war in black and white, there's almost just a sort of disconnect there. But then as soon as you see that footage recolored, which again Peter Jackson did in They Shall Not Grow Old, it just suddenly you see them more as people, and you're like, you feel for them and you feel like they're more relatable somehow. So just seeing the documentary as though it was shot today just helps massively. But then in between all the songwritings, you've got drama between people falling out, you've got a lot of laughs, because the Beatles were really fucking funny people. They would just sit around and they just chat absolute shit and have banter and come up with stupid riffs, and just like coming up with stupid lyrics off the cuff that they know they're never going to use, but it's just funny. Just seeing how geniuses work. There's a scene where you see Paul McCartney literally composing Get Back, and he starts out with the chords and he's sort of playing the chords and he doesn't even have any lyrics, he's just going and then he sort of slowly starts to like think of words, and then the words that he's coming up with on the spot end up being the words in the finished song. And John Lennon comes in and sits down and just sort of listens to it for a minute and then just starts strumming along and playing his guitar over it, and it's just incredible to see how those guys worked. So the Beatles, Get Back is my favourite documentary. Next we've got drama. Now again, drama is the kind of thing where almost any film ever could be put under the drama category, because stories need conflict and conflict is drama. So I was sort of trying to find what I would call a pure drama that wasn't a drama comedy, it wasn't a drama action, a drama crime, whatever, so just a pure drama. And for me, my favourite one of those is Whiplash. I would almost say there's an element of thriller to this, in that it's so intense and there's sort of emotional abuse and there's some kind of gory imagery at times, but I think it's a bit of a stretch to qualify it as a thriller, so it's going in the drama category. The two lead performances from Miles Teller and J.K. Simmons are just iconic. They're the kind of roles you just cannot imagine anyone else in either of those roles. They play off each other so well. J.K. Simmons in particular is just a powerhouse. He has so many great lines. It reminds me of Arlie Ermy in Full Metal Jacket. Just these absolute, like, I don't know how often those lines were actually in the script and how often J.K. Simmons just came up with them, but regardless, those lines are iconic. Even if they are horrible and in the context of the film they're not that nice, they do make for some pretty good and pretty creative insults. The way it's shot and edited, I mean, it's obviously it's a film about music and it's kind of shot, like Damien Chazelle said, they shot it like a sports film and it was kind of in time to the music. And, like people playing jazz, not to knock jazz, but it's not my genre of music. And to think that jazz could be exciting is something that probably a lot of people who aren't into jazz already would have scoffed at before they watched Whiplash. But you watch Whiplash and tell me that that isn't exciting, because the way it's shot, the quick cut editing, almost Edgar Wright-esque at times is the editing. And yeah, just great writing with great, I love the theme of sort of how much can you sacrifice to achieve your dream, and then once you've done that, was it all worth it? I love that. I love the idea behind it. It's a really simple movie as well. The premise of it, the locations, it was a really low budget film. There's barely any characters in it that actually have speaking lines, but it's just so well told. So yeah, my favourite drama of all time, Whiplash. Next up we've got family. So my favourite family film, again, I could have picked another like Pixar-y film for this, but I decided I'd go with a pure family film that doesn't sort of tread on the toes of any of the other categories. So I'm going to go with Back to the Future. Back to the Future is one of those films for me where I feel like you could pretty much show Back to the Future to anyone in the world and they would like it, or at the very least, they wouldn't dislike it. I think you'd have to have a really strong disposition to, I don't know, 80s films or Michael J. Fox to watch Back to the Future and not at least like it and find it charming and fun. It does blend a few genres together well. It's a comedy, of course, but it's also a sci-fi film, and it's also kind of a romance film. In that Marty McFly has to get his parents to sort of fall in love so that it fixes the timeline and all that sort of stuff. But again, great soundtrack. Again, talking about characters that you can't imagine being cast. And Robert Zemeckis actually has something in his like will or his contract or something that says when he dies, only when he dies can they remake it, but until then no one can remake Back to the Future. The first of 3 films, and all 3 of them are good. It's one of those trilogies where there isn't really a weak one. The first one is the best in my opinion, but they're all good films. It's just fun. It's just one of those films. It's kind of a light flick that you put on like a Sunday afternoon or something. Doesn't matter who you watch. You can watch it with your mates, you can watch it with your partner, you can watch it with your parents. You're still going to have fun. You can even watch it with your kids. Like whoever you watch it with, it's going to be suitable for anyone. It's funny, it's full of adventure, it's kind of quirky, and it's wholesome. So yeah, fun for all the family, Back to the Future. Next up on the list we've got fantasy, which was going to be taken by Empire Strikes Back, but I couldn't let that happen because I couldn't not mention Lord of the Rings, Return of the King. Now really for me, all 3 Lord of the Rings films kind of fall under the same umbrella. It's essentially one very long film that was just released in 3 parts, but for the sake of semantics and this, that, the other, I'm going to pick the third one because that's the one with all the emotional payoff. It's the one with all the action and the huge set pieces and stuff, and it's the conclusion to, this epic journey. And I don't use the word epic lightly when it comes to films, but the Lord of the Rings films are epic. The scope of them, the scale, the I mean, Howard Shore's music is just incredible. The performances, the world building, the directing from Peter Jackson. I mean, the world building in Lord of the Rings is arguably the best I've ever seen. You put all those elements together and, you know, you've got one of the most beloved franchises ever. And for me, Return of the King is the best of the three. I think it won 11 Oscars, which for a fantasy film to do that in 2004 is just ridiculous, but deserved. But, you know, the Academy don't normally recognise films in those particular genres or sort of franchise films, but it won 11 Oscars. If I'm wrong on that, it was nominated for 11 Oscars, but I'm sure it won 11 Oscars. There's not a weak element to it, in my opinion. The only criticism I've ever heard about it is that some people think the ending goes on too long, which I can understand, but I just don't agree with, because the trilogy is so long in itself. Like, I think if you watch the extended editions, which I do, I think it comes to about 11 and a half hours as a trilogy. So for me, if you're going to go on this 11-hour journey, you need a half an hour ending. If it ended in sort of 10-15 minutes, I just think it would feel a bit rushed. So for me, it needs those endings. I don't think there are really any you can cut. I think they all serve some purpose to the story or to the themes or to the characters. And for me, it's just the conclusion of the best trilogy of all time. Next on the list, we've got history, which again, history is not the kind of genre that I tend to watch a lot of. War films are the only kind of like historical films that I watch, but even then a lot of war films are sort of loosely based on true events, or they might not be based on true events at all. So, you know, you've got to pick one that's based on actual events, that's factual. And I checked to see on Letterboxd and IMDb if this film was listed as history, and it is, so I'm going with Dunkirk. It obviously was a true thing that happened, and it was depicted in such a way that I hadn't really seen before. I think as soon as Dunkirk came out, it was lauded by critics and fans alike, and it was called one of the best war films that ever came out. And people who, you know, were in the war saw the film and said it was so lifelike, and it's so nightmarish. It's almost like a horror film. It's just so tense. It was also the first film I ever saw in IMAX, so hearing that sound, like the gunshots and stuff right from the first minute, and then when the planes roar past, it's just, yeah, it was such a visceral experience. And, you know, the seats shaking and the volume's just way up, and the score, is it called a shepherd's tone that it has, where the score has this like thing where it just constantly sounds like it's rising, but it never reaches that top level. So it's just, the intensity just grows and grows and grows throughout the film. Harry Styles, remember, he got cast in it, and that was a big thing, and everyone was sort of like, oh, he's going to be terrible. And then he was absolutely fine. I mean, he wasn't a standout. I don't think he was nominated for anything, but, you know, he served his purpose fine. So you've got Cillian Murphy, Tom Hardy, Mark Rylance, really good cast, great directing, beautiful cinematography. In my opinion, it's one of Hans Zimmer's best scores that he's ever done. I love all the real, like, in-camera stuff that was done with sort of cameras mounted onto the wings of Spitfire planes and all that sort of stuff. The color grading to make it that sort of sea green, everything's that kind of deep sea green. I think it's just a beautiful film thematically, because it's all about hope, and then obviously visually, but at the same time, it's horrifying. But it definitely left an impact, and my only real criticism with it was that it didn't go on longer. So Dunkirk, my favourite historical film. Next up, we've got horror. So originally I was going to go with Shaun of the Dead for this, but again, when we're talking about genres that kind of overlap, I would say realistically, Shaun of the Dead's more of a comedy than a horror, and I felt like it was a bit of a cop-out, so I'm going to go with more of a pure horror, and I'm going to go with Scream. Now, I know Scream still has some of those comedy elements, but it's first and foremost a horror, I would say. I mean, it could be a thriller, it could be a mystery, it could be a drama. I would call it a horror. I mean, there's a guy running around dressed, you know, in a Scream mask and with a scythe, and he's going around killing people. I mean, that's a horror film, right? If you're new to the channel, you might not know, that was the chair. If you're new to this channel, you might not know, but Matthew Lillard is one of my favourite actors. I think he's super underrated, and Scream is one of the only films that he's in where I feel like everyone gets to see how great he is. His comic timing is just brilliant. He plays that kind of disturbed man-child role so well. He does that in a few films. He did a flick called Dead Man's Curve, which it kind of has a similar vibe. Definitely his character has a similar vibe to this, and he just knocks that out of the park. He plays that cocky guy so well, and yeah, you can't help but love him. And the whole central mystery, the opening like 10-15 minutes with is it Drew Barrymore in the house, and she's getting the phone calls. That, if that was just a short film on its own, would be perfect. It's a great way to open the film, and the commentary on the horror genre and the meta-ness that goes with that works really well, but at the same time, it never overdoes it. The horror always comes first, so if the characters are in jeopardy, it's not going to be undercut, like the tension of that won't be undercut by a meta moment, but in the sort of moments of levity, they'll sort of touch upon the horror genre and it'll provide some meta moments, but for the most part, you actually care about the characters, the narrative comes first, and all the commentary stuff comes later. So Scream is my favourite horror film. Next, we've got musical, and there's only ever going to be one answer to this, and that's La La Land. Generally speaking, I'm not a big fan of musicals. I actually have seen a lot of the classic ones because I grew up watching them on VHS. My mum had like The Sound of Music, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, The Wizard of Oz, loads of sort of 50s, 60s musicals like that. It's never really been my genre. Singing in the Rain is one I've always loved, but for me, La La Land, it brings the modern sensibilities to a kind of older genre and it sort of meshes them together really well. First of all, I mean, the most important thing in a musical is how's the original music. Well, the original music is great. I think it won an Oscar, City of Stars, and Best Original Song. I watch that film or I hear that music and I'm just taken right back to that place, and it's, you know, sort of pulls on your heartstrings emotionally. You remember the part of the film it's from and how you felt when you watched it and all that sort of stuff. So the music's great, but the directing, the cinematography, and not just the way, because it was shot on celluloid, right? So Damien Chazelle said he wanted to evoke the really bright colours from films like Wizard of Oz, which he definitely does. You see some of like the really bright greens or purples or yellows coming out in costumes or in sets, and it just looks gorgeous. But then also the chemistry between Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone. It's their third film that they've done together, so they obviously had that established chemistry. They were also in Crazy Stupid Love before that, where they were love interests. I've not seen Gangster Squad, so I don't know if they're love interests in that, but it's obvious that they've worked together before because their chemistry is just there to be seen. It's just oozing off the screen. And the film was shot with so much style as well from Damien Chazelle. And then the cherry on top of all of this is the fact that you think you know where the narrative's going, and you think it's going to be a kind of generic rom-com where the guy ends up with the girl, and then, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen La La Land, they don't end up together. They both choose to sort of follow their dreams rather than be with each other. Because I've got friends who started watching it, and Matt, I'm looking at you when I say this, who say that, oh, yeah, it just doesn't, you know, I watched the opening and I didn't really like it, you know, I think I know where it's going, you know, it's just one of those girly films with music, but it really isn't like that. And especially when you get to the end, if you watch that whole film and you don't feel something at that end scene, then, I mean, you're just a lizard person or a robot, because it's powerful stuff. So yeah, love La La Land, favourite musical ever. Next on the list is mystery. So for this one, I had a few potential options. It's like Scream was one of the options, but I thought, no, that's really a horror, and then I had other things, and I thought, are they really mystery? So I decided to go with Unbreakable. Now you can tell me if you think it's a mystery. It's listed as a mystery on IMDb and Letterboxd, but it is a superhero film, and it is a drama film, and almost a thriller, but there is an element of mystery to it as well, because the whole thing is this guy who, for anyone who hasn't seen Unbreakable or doesn't know the premise, just listen to the premise because it's fucking awesome. So basically, the main guy, David Dunn, played by Bruce Willis, he's in a train crash one day, and he's the only survivor, and he's not got a scratch on him. And then he starts to think back over his life, and he realises that he's never missed a day of work, he's never been ill, he's never caught anything, and he starts to just wonder, like, is there something different about me? Like, have I got some sort of ability? And if I do, how far does that go? How far can I push that? Like, what are my boundaries? And then Elijah Price, played by Samuel L. Jackson, in one of my favourite roles ever of his, is this guy that is like a comic book nerd, and he sees something in David Dunn and he sort of tries to bring this stuff out of him. And of course, it's an M. Night Shyamalan film, so there's twists and turns, but it's just a really simple premise, very slow but deliberate film that slowly builds, slowly winds up the tension, and it's a superhero film really like no other. There's not a single superhero film I can think of that's anything like this. It's a character study, it's slow, it's methodical, there's barely an action scene in it, it's just about this guy trying to figure out what's going on, and Samuel L. Jackson, who's got his own agenda, and it's just about watching that play out. But I love Unbreakable, I think it's so refreshing, such a unique film, and for that reason it's my favourite mystery. After mystery, we've got romance. The film I've gone with, it has a romantic element, but it is also a drama, and that's Good Will Hunting. I think the primary genre of Good Will Hunting probably is a drama, because the romantic side of things is kind of a subplot, whereas the stuff with Matt Damon and Robin Williams is the main story. But I think it plays such an integral part to his character and his character arc. If you look at the resolution, like the very last scene of that film, it's Matt Damon driving off to go and get his girl back. It's a relationship that I really care about. Like, most of the time in film and TV, I don't care about couples. I mean, you got the ones like Pam and Jim from The Office where you can't not. But generally speaking, I don't care for couples in films. Like, I never really care if they break up or get back together or whatever. But there's something so genuine about this. Like, they don't have a perfect relationship. They are both flawed people and they're not perfect for each other. But you can tell that they have this chemistry and they obviously really like each other, and they have good times and good banter together, and they play off each other well, and they kind of try to make it work. And then the fact that they could have had it, but because Matt Damon's character is kind of afraid of failure and he thinks it might fuck it up, you know, then it sort of dissipates. And that's one of the only times really in the film where I actually was like, oh, I hope they get back together, because I don't normally care. But it was just written in such a way and acted in such a way where I really cared about it. And also, you've got kind of a parallel thing going on with Robin Williams and Matt Damon, where Robin Williams is telling Matt Damon about how he met his wife, and, you know, if he'd never done this or never done that, then he wouldn't have met her, and how, you know, he wouldn't change anything, and that sort of resonates with Matt Damon and it inspires him to go and get his girl back. But Robin Williams in this film, man, is just one of my... I've not really thought enough about what is my favourite performance in a film ever, but Robin Williams in Good Will Hunting would be up there. It wouldn't be number one, I don't think, but it'd be a top 10 contender for sure. He is just so powerful, I guess. Like, he really brings the emotion, but not in that powerhouse acting kind of way where it's like he's gunning for the Oscar. It just felt so natural. It feels so candid when you're watching it. You forget it's even a film. Like, you can't see the performance. It's just so real and raw. Yeah, it's emotionally powerful, but it's charming and it's likable and it's funny and it's cheeky. He kind of acts as this mentor guy to Matt Damon, but at the same time, he won't take any shit off Matt Damon. Their dynamic is just as interesting as Matt Damon and Minnie Driver's. So a pick for romance is Good Will Hunting. Now we're on to sci-fi, and I'm going to go with The Matrix. I've got to give an honourable mention here because the film that missed out only missed out by a hair's breadth. So the film that missed out was Terminator 2 Judgment Day. For me, I would put that more in the action category than the sci-fi. Granted, it is obviously both. But for me, I think of that more as an action film than a sci-fi film, whereas The Matrix I think of as more of a sci-fi film than an action film, even though, again, it is both. I was never the biggest fan of The Matrix growing up. Like Matt will tell you, it's one of his films of all time. And, you know, one of my best mates, Johnny, it's his favourite film of all time. And another one of my best mates is his favourite film. Like, I know so many people who love The Matrix, like it's one of their favourite films or it is their favourite films, and I was just never on that level for it. I've always loved Keanu. He's always been one of my favourite actors, and I've always liked the film. I'll watch it and I'll have a good time with it, but it's just never had that staying power for me. But then I watched it, I think like maybe 5 years went by where I didn't watch it, and then in the last 3 years I've watched it once a year for the last 3 years, and every time I've watched it, it's just gone high. Like the first time I watched it, I was like, okay, fair enough, I'll bump that up a half star, that's getting in my top 100. Second time I watched it, it went up to my top 50, and then the third time I watched it, it got into my top 30. And it's, I don't know, there's a lot of clever storytelling in terms of foreshadowing and subtle things that come into play later that you might not pick up on the first few times you watch it. I think Agent Smith's a great villain. I think Neo is a great hero. I love Morbius, I love Trinity, great collection of side characters. The action scenes themselves were obviously groundbreaking at the time and are still awesome now. I love the closing credits song by Rage Against the Machine, Wake Up, and what that's saying, like on a thematic level. Also, The Matrix is just one of those films that has so much to say in terms of the story. It's all about, you know, are we living in a simulation? And if we are, what does that really mean? How do we break out of it? We don't really know when it's set. I think it's about 200 years in the future or something like that, but humans are plugged in. And it's about AI, and it's about consciousness, and it's about, I mean, you know, Morpheus even says in the film, what is real? How do you define real? That to me is such an interesting concept, because we live in a time where people like Elon Musk are telling us that we're probably living in a simulation, or that we're probably a brain in a tank or something. But it's kind of like the Inception thing of, well, my experience here is still the same regardless of the actual fact of the matter. So does any of it really matter? And in The Matrix, they take that a step further, and it's like, okay, well, we've seen the real world and it's shitty. Do we free people and let them live in this shitty world, but at least I know the truth, or do we just let them carry on living in the Matrix? And just exploring that, the action, the sci-fi ideas, the groundbreaking visual elements, and the fight choreography and all that stuff. It's just a cool movie with a lot of style and a lot of swagger, and obviously Keanu Reeves in the main role. You can't go wrong. So now we're on to the superhero genre, and if you've watched my channel for any amount of time at all, you'll know the answer to this is between one of two films. This guy right here, Big Tobey Maguire Spider-Man fan in particular. Those first two films really, I honestly, like, I could flip a coin and just pick whichever one it landed on and be completely satisfied with that. But I'm gonna go with Spider-Man, the first one. I do think Spider-Man 2 is technically the better film. It's more of a character drama and it delves a bit deeper and some of the practical effects are better and it sort of has more to say, and I think it's a more adult, more mature film. But there's just something so fun about that first film. I've always been a sucker for a superhero film. When you get that sequence where the characters are learning how to use their powers, I've always loved seeing that, and that stems from seeing it in the first Spider-Man film. Of course, there's a lot of nostalgia there. I was 6 years old when that came out. I remember for my 7th birthday, I got like a web shooter thing where, you know, you put it on your wrist and it shoots. I used it all within like 5 minutes, and I was never allowed to refill it because it was like such a pain in the ass for my parents. But anyway, I've always been a big fan of Spider-Man. It stems from that first film. It's so much fun. Seeing Willem Dafoe as Green Goblin is obviously just one of the highlights of the entire genre. I mean, there are maybe 2 or 3 better supervillains in the superhero genre than Green Goblin, played by Willem Dafoe. And even then, we've seen him reprise that role in the last year, and he's still got it. He was still an absolute scene stealer. So great villain, really great, like iconic hero with just, they told his story right. It was cheesy. I'm not going to say it isn't, but it works for that character. Spider-Man, to me, growing up in the 90s and the 2000s, watching that 90s animated show, Spider-Man was cheesy. If you go back and read the old Spider-Man comics, they're super cheesy. Yeah, maybe that wouldn't work now that we're sort of used to the MCU and we're accustomed to a bit more realism, but back in the day, you know, I mean, like the scene, I mean, it's so Sam Raimi when the Goblin throws his pumpkin bomb and the guys in the suits, like the executives on the balcony, they just like evaporate. You see their skeleton for a second and it's so dumb and it makes no sense and doesn't even really fit in with the rest of the film, to be honest, like stylistically, but it's just goofy, and sometimes I love a bit of goof. So early 2000s film with a lot of goof, a lot of heart though, some great fight scenes, a great villain, and it introduced me to my favourite character ever in Spider-Man and Peter Parker, so on the big screen, that is. So Spider-Man for favourite superhero movie of all time, but it could have been Spider-Man 2. Next up, we're on to thriller, and for thriller, I'm going to go with Fight Club. Now again, like some of the other ones I've mentioned, you can debate whether it's really a thriller, it's kind of a drama, it's kind of a this, it's kind of a that, but it's a thrilling film, and so I feel like it deserves to be in the thriller genre. The fact that it's got these themes about consumerism and even like masculinity and the dangers of blindly following a leader. In 1999, if you were a young person in that time who didn't really know where you were going and you hated your job and you worked in an office and you just felt like you were treading water and what's the point, I feel like Fight Club just must have spoken to you so hard. It just kind of punches you in the face or in the gut and says like, hey, wake up, you know, your life's ending 1 minute at a time, you're fucking wasting it sitting around buying expensive furniture and working a shitty office, just fucking get out there, have some fun. And you know, at the end of a fight, nothing's solved, but nothing matters, and it's all about just being free in that way. And Tyler Durden, by the way, I know people, like, everyone used to say Tyler Durden was like the coolest character ever put in a movie, and then more recently people said, well, actually he's not that cool because he does a lot of toxic stuff. And yes, he does do a lot of toxic stuff, and no, you're not really supposed to root for him because he ends up fucking things up, and you know, he takes it to the other extreme. But just to watch, right, I'm not talking about his morals or anything like that, but just to watch on screen Brad Pitt with the charisma he has, playing Tyler Durden with the values and the morals and the lifestyle he has, is just a joy to watch. He is just one of the most watchable, magnetic characters ever put in a film. And it's because he's the complete opposite of Edward Norton. Edward Norton's in a box and he's just an average Joe, and then, you know, he lives by all these rules, and Tyler Durden comes along, he doesn't live by any rules, and he's just like an anomaly, and he seems to just be living off the grid, and he does what he wants, and he has no one to tell him what to do, or, you know, he has no constraints, and that's what we all want, isn't it? So yeah, Tyler Durden, Fight Club as a whole, great fucking film and a great thriller. So the penultimate genre on this list is war, and for a war film, I know I've already had Dunkirk, but I prefer this film to Dunkirk, and this one doesn't technically fall under the history genre, so it is war. My pick for war is Inglourious Basterds. That's the 3rd Tarantino film on this list, I think. Maybe I should start checking out some of the filmmakers. But I don't know what to say. The guy just has a way. Like every genre he touches, pretty much, he makes one of the best films in that genre. He's done it with Western, he's done it with crime, he's done it with drama, he's done it with blaxploitation, he's done it with action, he's done it with war, he's even done it with comedy. A lot of people would categorise Pulp Fiction as a comedy, or Once Upon a Time in Hollywood as a comedy. So the guy's just a genius. I love pretty much everything he makes, but Inglourious Basterds for me, I think the thing that sets it apart from the other war films for me is the sense of fun. Yes, there are scenes where the tension is just, I mean, there are scenes in that film, like the opening scene, the scene in the basement as well later on, that's like 40 minutes long where they're playing cards and drinking. Those two scenes are literally two of the most intense scenes ever put in a film. But yet at the same time, it manages to be really fun and really silly and really humorous. A lot of that comes from Brad Pitt's character being a little bit derpy. Part of it comes from Christoph Waltz sort of toying with them because he knows that they're up to something and they think that they're getting away with it. But it's funny, it's fun, it's action-packed, it's brutal. Some of the violence in it, as you can imagine with a Quentin Tarantino film. The soundtrack's great, the performances are incredible. Just, I mean, some of the dialogue in that film, I mean, there's a scene where Lieutenant Aldo Raine, played by Brad Pitt, has he's like introducing himself to his troops, and it's like a 2 or 3 minute scene on YouTube where he's just explaining who he is and what the mission plan is. But the way it's written and the way it's delivered just somehow make it so memorable and so much fun to watch. There are just so many lines like that. Hans Landa is one of the best villains, again, you'll ever see in a film. I would argue that Hans Landa might be the best character that Quentin Tarantino has ever created, and I think Tarantino might even agree with that. I know they almost didn't make Inglourious Basterds because they couldn't find an actor good enough. Because don't forget, not only has he got to be charming and cunning, but evil and intelligent and funny and terrifying and all those things, but he also speaks English, German, Italian, and I think French as well. So Christoph Waltz was the man for the job. They found him like 2 days before they were going to like officially shut down production because they didn't think they could find anyone to play that role. And he knocked it out of the fucking park. Just a great film, just a great war film that somehow makes it fun. It takes one of the most horrific events in history, flips it on its ear, says, what about if this happened instead? And it's just a blast. And the great thing about that, the genius thing about that is no one's going to give a shit about watching that film, no matter how violent it is, because the people on the other end of that violence are Nazis. So who's going to have an issue with Jews going around killing Nazis? I would imagine nobody, except Nazis, and fuck Nazis. So yeah, Inglourious Basterds, great film. And that brings us on to the last genre in this list, which is Western. Another Tarantino film is Django Unchained. It's actually the film that got me into Westerns. When I was 19, I decided to write a film, like a full feature-length film. And I wrote this Western that was about, basically it was about this like murderer that was on the loose, and he was worth like so much money. The bounty on his head was like so big that like every bounty hunter in the area was going after him, and it was about how they kept double crossing each other and trying to get to him first and killing each other to get to him and all that. It was terrible. But it came because I'd watched Django Unchained, and I was like, holy shit, I'd only seen Westerns from like the 60s before that and found them kind of boring. Like I remember watching The Searchers when I was a teenager, and maybe if I watched it again now, I'd find it a lot better. But when I watched it as a teenager, I didn't really get it. I just found it kind of slow and boring. And that was what I thought a Western was like. And then I watched Django Unchained and I was like, oh shit, you mean they can actually have like modern pacing, great performances, tons of action, it's really exciting. And it just kind of opened a whole new door to me. It's a beautifully shot film, great soundtrack again with the humour, like the scene with the bags where they're all putting the bags on before the raid is just hilarious. Leonardo DiCaprio's performance, Christoph Waltz's performance, Samuel L. Jackson's performance, and we haven't even mentioned the main guy, Jamie Foxx. I mean, yeah, just that action, it's just entertaining as hell. It's got one of the best scripts Quentin's ever written. I think he also won Best Original Screenplay for that. And it's just a lot of fun, and like I say, it opened a door for me, because then after that I went back and I watched for the first time loads of Westerns that I hadn't seen, things like The Good, the Bad and the Ugly and that whole Dollars trilogy, and even more recent things like Hell or High Water and The Hateful Eight and just things like that. Even like sort of pseudo Westerns like No Country for Old Men, I just suddenly had a new interest in them. For that, I've got to give props to Quentin Tarantino and to Django Unchained. So Django Unchained is my favourite Western. So that was 20 genres and my favourite film within each of those genres. And I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know your thoughts down below, because I do like to see people's lists. I'm imagining yours will be quite different from mine, but let's see. That's the fun of it, seeing what people like to do. And also, I haven't really seen anyone do this video. I actually searched for this video thinking it would be a thing, and I didn't really see anyone do it. So yeah, let me know your thoughts, because right now I don't know anyone's thoughts on this. So yeah, let me know. Thanks again for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you shortly. And by shortly, I mean probably in about 9 months when I next upload. Sorry about that.